Hello, and welcome to the Beginner's Guide to Genshin Impact. My name is Azuark, and today we are going to talk about Resin. Like many free-to-play games, Genshin Impact has an energy system that limits the player's actions each day, so they won't burn themselves out immediately, and will have incentive to return day after day. Original Resin is a resource that slowly accumulates around the clock, up to a maximum of 200. Certain activities, almost all of which are tied to the advancement of your characters, cost Resin. You can enjoy the entire rest of the game without the use of Resin, which means there's still hundreds of hours of gameplay without having to wait for the bar to refill. Resin is spent in one of three ways: challenging a ley line disorder, completing a domain, or collecting the rewards from defeating a boss. Of these, the ley lines are by far the least popular option. While they allow you to grind mora or experience, these are commodities that can be gained through other means, which makes them exceptionally unattractive outlets for Resin. Ley lines will deplete 20 of your Resin. Domains also cost 20 Resin. While there are some one-time domains that are for quests, the majority of them are quick combat challenges that reward you with items needed to ascend weapons, to upgrade talents, or reward you with artifacts. Long-term, this will be the most common use of your Resin, for reasons I'll get into in a second. Finally, there are bosses, which fall into two categories: world bosses and weekly bosses. With the exception of Andreas, which is a weekly boss, every boss marked directly on your map, which you can encounter in the overworld, is a world boss. Their primary purpose is to give their unique ascension materials for the select few characters who need it. At launch, every Pyro character needed the Pyro Regisvine, every Electro character needed the Electro Hypostasis, every Hydro character upgraded via the Oceanid, etc. Over time, there have been a great many other bosses added throughout Teyvat, and starting with Ganyu in version 1.2, post-launch characters use those bosses instead. World bosses will be challenging at first, until you learn how they operate, and then they will probably become fairly easy to challenge. In addition to their ascension mats, they also will reward you with a number of elemental gemstones, also for character ascensions, and a handful of artifacts. At higher levels, these come from the Gladiators and Wanderers troop sets, which can only be acquired from bosses. World bosses cost 40 Resin, meaning you could fight them 5 times in a row before needing to wait. They respawn pretty much immediately after you vacate their arena. Weekly bosses are big climactic set pieces that take place in their own private domains, again, except for Andreas. With the exception of Dvalin, all of them can be fought in co-op. Weekly bosses give the same secondary rewards as world bosses, but in greater quantities. They also eventually start rewarding you with special resources needed for upgrading talents past level 6. Additionally, they have a chance for dropping Dream Solvent, which is related to those talent materials, and billets, which are used for making craftable weapons. Weekly bosses cost 60 Resin, but the first 3 each week are half price. I recommend you pick the 3 that are most important to you, or whatever you have access to by that point, and not stress more. I haven't talked much about talents yet, and it will be a long time before you're worried about this, but because weekly bosses can literally only be fought once per week, this is very much something you ought to start doing right away. The special talent items don't drop at the lowest level, but you still get a shot at all the other rewards. So, now let's return to domains. The first type of Resin-based domain you'll unlock is for weapon materials. Obnoxiously, the specific item you want will only be available one day in 3, either Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday, or Wednesday, Saturday. Checking the item details will tell you which. At least on Sundays, you'll be able to pick whichever upgrade item you want, but note that the entrance screen will offer you 3 versions of the domain, with the only difference being which reward it yields, so make sure you pick the correct one. Weapons will eventually move past needing the green versions of those drops to blue, then purple, and finally orange. Seeing as those higher rarities scarcely ever drop, you'll need to rely on using an alchemy bench to upgrade the lower tier variants. The second domain type is for talent books. These work almost exactly the same as weapon domains. Upgrading talents is unavailable until your characters have been ascended at least twice, and only by 1 level. With each subsequent ascension, you'll be able to raise them 2 more levels. Upgrading a character's talents is much lower in priority than their character level or their weapon level, but it will become a very important aspect of increasing power level as time goes on, since each talent level upgrades an ability to be roughly 7% stronger. That means that after 10 talent levels, it will be roughly twice as powerful as it was initially, so don't sleep on these. And the final domain type is for artifacts. Prevailing wisdom dictates that you not worry about artifact domains until you reach AR 45, and then go after them hard. The reason for this is because all the other aspects of characters that I've been describing are upgrades. But even if you do level up artifacts, ultimately they are disposable. You will get better artifacts rendering the ones you have junk. AR 45 is when you can start consistently getting the highest quality artifacts, so just hold your horses and work with whatever's in your bags until then. As a result, between AR 15 and AR 45, your primary objective with your resin is usually going to be to upgrade any weapons or talents that are available that day, and go after world bosses when you've got nothing left to improve. If you stick with spending your resin and you aren't a content clearing machine, you should be able to comfortably upgrade 3 and maybe 4 characters completely before hitting the next wave of ascensions and having to start all over again. I'll eventually do a separate video talking about this specifically, but this is one of the main reasons why you'll hear me constantly repeat that you should stick to a small cast of characters until you can comfortably afford to spread your resources a bit more. So resin's important. Spend it if you got it. But what if you don't got it? There are 4 ways to extend your resin. The first is with something called condensed resin. As a reward from the Liyue reputation system, you will be able to take your resin on a given day and smush it into an item that can be spent on a future day. Each of these items holds 40 resin, and you can have a maximum of 5, so 1 full supply. Condensed resin can be spent on domains or ley lines to get credit for 2 at once, so most players use it to speed up farming. However, you could also condense on a day you don't feel like playing and save that resin for another day. Note that even though condensed resin is good for 40 resin, it cannot be used on world bosses. The second is with a special item called fragile resin, which just adds 60 to your pool. You can see how much resin you currently have when you open the map. If you access your resin from there, it will ask you if you want to spend 1 or more of your fragile resin. There is a particular point in your account's development that I encourage you to save these for, so it is strongly recommended you do not spend them, or at least not all of them. The third is right next to it on the same screen. You can spend Primo Gems to get an extra 60 resin. The first time you do this, it costs 50 Primo Gems, which isn't awful, but they get progressively more expensive. The first resin refresh is questionable, but it can be justified, especially if you're buying the Blessing of the Welkin Moon. The 4 that follow, however, are obscene, especially if you start purchasing Genesis crystals to pay for them. Only do this if you have more money than God. And your final option is the intended way. You wait. Resin refreshes at a rate of 1 point every 8 minutes, which translates to 180 per day. With the cap being 200, this means if you play roughly the same time each day, you should be able to burn through your resin without actually wasting any. If you're not used to playing a game with an energy system, it might feel constraining to have to wait until the next day, but the game's lifespan is predicated on keeping people interested and in encouraging you to play a little each day rather than a whole lot for a week. The resin system is definitely effective at doing that. And that's all I got for today. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.